Hello and welcome to the romance track here at ConTinual. Tonight we are talking about LGBTQ plus romance and paranormal romance. So we're going to talk about all the spooky goodness, but first let's let everybody introduce themselves, starting with Liv.
Hi, I'm not muted. Nope. Okay, good. I'm Liv and I write historical or paranormal romance, and sometimes both at the same time.
Very good. Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Burke. I'm known as Flash. I'm a USA Today bestselling author who's had over 100 books to my belt. And I love mixing in my paranormal with my LGBTQ because it's just so much fun. So much things you can get away with. So, yay.
How about you, Ari?
I'm McKay, and with my writing partner, Rachel Langella, we write contemporary romance as Ari McKay, and we write paranormal as Rachel Langella.
Great. EJ.
I'm EJ Russell. I write across the spectrum of romance, contemporary, historical, but my main wheelhouse is paranormal rom-com, sort of quirky and verging on screwball. So if it's not fun, why bother, you know?
That's very true. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Langella, and with my partner, Ari McKay, we write a lot of different genres, and one of them that we can coming back to is romance.
Okay. Raven.
I am Raven deHart, and I write mostly paranormal, a few contemporaries, but the main wheelhouse is paranormal male. Okay.
And I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy, lots of ghosts and vampires and werewolves there. And as Morgan Brice, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance with lots of ghosts and vampires and werewolves and plenty of spooky stuff and lots of magic. Because every story is better with a ghost in it. Or two or three. So, what's the first book that you remember that got you hooked on all things paranormal? Stephanie?
It would come to me. There are so
many ears. Come on, you know.
I have to go back far to find my first real paranormals. And I think my first real paranormal that actually bordered on romance would be this one from an author I cannot find anymore, but the book was called Witch. And the thing that struck me was that this poor woman whose daughter popped up with this magical ability to do magic, and then there was the modern day witch hunts behind it. But the thing that grabbed me was this guy his job was a gatekeeper. He was supposed to unlock the magic. And this dude was solidly in a male-male relationship, but he still and yet had to go and have sex with all these other women to unlock their power. And it was the only way that his partner was like, I can divide the work. If it's a male witch, we're going to have issues. And it was just a little side thing. I was a teenager reading this story, and it was like, wait, what? I never considered that. That's a whole new list of issues that might happen with somebody in a relationship like this. I need to find more of this because it was so different. So I went digging, and it was years before I found anything else similar to that. But that first one right there with that couple discussing their relationship issues in front of this woman who's like, I just need somebody to screw me so I can get the magic to save my child. Can somebody please, get off the argument and help me? That was the most amazing thing in my teenage life at that point. So I've been trying to find something like that. I couldn't find it. I decided I was going to write it because it doesn't always have to be serious and death-taking. That little bit of humor in there, it made them more real to me. It seemed like they were real people then. And I love that. So that was my first.
Okay. Ari.
Oh, I started out with a lot of the old Alfred Hitchcock stories for children was where I got my start in paranormal. And probably the first big one that I ever read was Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And that's where I started my love affair with vampires for forever.
Sounds fair to me. EJ?
Actually, we have to go way back. I was about 8 or 9, and visiting my grandmother in a very tiny town in Illinois. Their library was only open 2 days a week, 2 afternoons a week, in fact. And I found this book in a stack on the floor called Horace. And it had an embossed little dragon on the front, which I thought was very interesting. I'd never been exposed to that before. And it was, for one thing, it was a British fantasy, a British children's fantasy about a girl who meets a baby dragon on her way to the greengrocer one day. And he invites her to tea, which requires her to jump off the bridge. And she finds herself in a world of dragons. And it taught me so many things, that book. The first thing was to learn from context, to extrapolate from context, because my grandmother had an 8th grade education. She didn't know anything about, British terminology. So it's like, what's a greengrocer? Do they only sell green food? And she found a half a crown once. Well, a half a crown wouldn't fit on your head, really, would it? So it was like, it opened up a whole new world. And it not only sort of instigated a lifelong love of the paranormal and fantasy, but also of British humor and British children's books. And I sort of, once I discovered Diana Wynne Jones, it was like, it was all over.
How about you, Rachel?
I kind of have to go way back as well. I think I probably started dabbling with fairy tales, like that laid the foundation. But when I was 9, I think, it was the year after the original Star Wars came out. Ralph Bakshi did a Lord of the Rings animated movie, but he only went from Fellowship of the Ring through the first half of the Two Towers. And the same enabling friend of the family who took me to see Star Wars the previous year took me to see this. And of course, it ended on a cliffhanger. And I was like, but what happened? And she was like, want to read the book? And so that's what did it. From there, it was just, full on C.S. Lewis, and then segue to Stephen King, and no looking back since.
I totally get that. Raven.
So for like paranormal and fantasy in general, that's what I read growing up. For paranormal romance, I remember the first one, and it was Nora Roberts' Key trilogy, Key of Light, Key of Knowledge, Key of Power. And I remember reading that at an age that was not appropriate. We don't need to we won't say what age it was, but I had a library card. So, but yeah, so that was my first paranormal romance, fairies, and there's something evil in the love story. That's odd. Yeah.
I got hooked on all things paranormal as a preschooler watching Dark Shadows, the old spooky soap opera. And that got me into vampires and werewolves and ghosts and witches and magic and time travel and all that good stuff. And I went looking for more of it. And I think the first book that I really remember reading like that was Jane Emily. And it was this was before they called things YA, but it was a middle grades book, and bought it at the Scholastic Book Fair. And it was about a headstrong girl who haunted the garden ball at her grandmother's house and wreaked havoc on the family because of that haunted garden ball. And I've always given the side eye to garden balls ever since then. They're suspicious and dangerous. But I also read the Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, and anything that had a whiff of ghost story in it, because that was always just better. How about you, Liv?
So I don't remember, sort of. I was the kid who read a book a day in middle school, and I used to reread the Lord of the Rings trilogy every year, in at least once a year in high school. And I don't think this is the first vampire book that I read, but the first one I really remember was Lestat, and Rice is the Vampire Lestat. And that blew my mind, and also made me completely dislike Louis. And so I've never, like, when I read Interview, I was just like, who is this whiner? But I think the first, I'll wrap up quick. The first sort of urban fantasy paranormal that really sent me down the pathway that where I'm ending up today was Dead Until Dark, the first Sookie Stackhouse book, because that was kind of the first urban fantasy series, and like from there I went to that I read, and then from there I went to Anita Blake and Rachel Morgan, and like pretty much name your popular urban fantasy series, and that. So yeah.
Okay. So if you haven't already said what got you into paranormal romance and why, then let's tell me now. And if you have already, we'll come up with another few books to mention, because there are plenty of good ones out there. Ari?
Oh, well, I was always more of a science fiction reader, I'll be honest. That I was definitely more, and I still to this day read military science fiction. That's like my first love. But I really got into a rather problematic nowadays fandom that I really don't want to give any more popularity to because of what goes on, but it's actually where I met Rachel, and we were doing, and it was a fantasy genre, and there were some obviously to us at least gay characters that, you know, we always had our slash goggles on. So that was where I really got into the whole thing, was through fanfic, because it wasn't, other than maybe some, I mean, Thieves World had, you know, gay characters obviously, but there were not as many, at least not in the mainstream kind of fiction that I was reading. So I got into fanfic very heavily, and that's where I went into the gay romance, and especially the paranormal gay romance.
Okay. EJ?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I was trying to remember. Like Ari, I also had, in addition to my fixation with British children's fantasy, science fiction obsession as well, because I was in 6th grade when the first episode of Star Trek TOS broadcast, and I watched it with my dad, and I think he regretted that ever after that, because I was hooked on it. I had other kids, I mean, that was when I was like 6th grade going into middle school. The other girls had crushes on people like Bobby Sherman or, you know, other singers. I had a crush on Mr. Spock, not Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock. In terms of the first gay paranormal romance I read, I'm trying to remember. And it was, I think I couldn't find any, and that's why I wrote one. This was like back in 2011. And I had only recently discovered, you know, Josh Lanyon's Adrian English series. And Suzanne Brockman had written her Jules and Robin marriage story all through the night. But there wasn't anything that sort of scratched the itch. At least I didn't know how to find it at that time. I suspect that there were a lot of books, but I didn't know about them, which is why I wrote my first ghost story book. My first published book was a supernatural suspense as a result of that.
Cool. Rachel?
So I think what got me into paranormal romance in general was probably your standard male-female romance novels, because I started reading those when I was in my early teens, perhaps younger. And, you know, those were always kind of in the mix. And, you know, this was a while back. So there were not any LGBT mainstream books. There just weren't, you know. If you were lucky, you had, you know, kind of a side character or background story. I think the closest one of my generation would be Mercedes Lackey, the Valdemar books, which I I don't think I found those until I was in college. So yeah, it was just standard male female romance, and I didn't get into LGBT male romance until fan fiction.
Okay. How about you, Raven?
Oh, I mean, like I said before, the Nora Roberts books were my first paranormal romances for male. Oh, I don't even know. It would have been around the time I started writing it, probably. So.
Okay. I was never into, regular contemporary male female romance. I just I never identified with the women there. They just were not who I was or who I wanted to be. But if you threw in a vampire or a ghost or a werewolf, then I could look past some of those shortcomings. And a lot of times those books had female characters that weren't wilting daisies, who kicked some real ass and were much stronger characters. So I read Patricia Briggs's Mercy Thompson series and Sherilyn Kenyon's Dark Hunter series. And of course, I read Interview with the Vampire, which probably counts as my first male-male romance, because there was a lot of subtext there, even if they never really came out and said it. We all knew.
Subtext is a scrambled word for butt sex.
This is true. More often than not. And Dead Until Dark, the Sookie Stackhouse books. And I fell in love with Supernatural, no big surprise there. And I started to read the fan fiction, and then I started to read the slash, and really fell in love with the slash and said, this is so good. What does the published stuff look like? And the first series I happened upon was Jordan L. Hawkes' Wyborn and Griffin Widdershins series, which was just fantastic. And that's where Morgan Brice came from, because I decided this was just too much fun and I wanted to be in on it too. So yeah, that's the progression. How about you, Liv?
I think, well, you already heard my reading history, probably more detailed than you necessarily needed. But I do think, as far as male paranormal, I won't swear to it, but the first one I really remember was the Magpie Lord series by KJ Charles. And to this day, I still want to be KJ Charles when I grow up.
I think a lot of us do. How about you, Stephanie?
Well, like I said, Witch was the first one that I actually read that had male element. Well, was straight out male, even though they were secondary characters. Maybe even tertiary if you look at it some ways, but they were there. The thing that really got me into paranormal, though, I have to say, is Clan of the Cave Bear. Now, that's an interesting way to go about it, because I come from a long line of Southern root workers. So ghosts were not things that you play with in my family. No, you do not deal with that at all. But when I was about 12 years old, my mom tossed me Valley of the Horses. And she's like, well, book is thick enough, that'll keep you occupied. She knew that book was nothing but sex on top of sex with sex in between. But in the middle of all of that, the whole paranormal elements of her going back and having her totem talk to her and having the fantasies with the Malgur and all that, that struck me as like, oh, wow. That's not this scary, the devil's going to pop up behind a cornfield and shank me type of stories as I've been hearing about. This one's a lot more interesting. It's a lot more fascinating. So that kind of grabbed my attention towards the paranormal, which in turn pushed me towards out of Jean Ahl, to Anne McCaffrey and the Dragon Rider series. And it was like, wait, what? They're doing stuff like that. Because when the dragons went in heat, I was like, oh. Once again, it was that feeling that I got when I stole my mom's Harlequins when I was like 8 years old. Like, why is my belly feeling this way? That's really weird. It was that thing all over again. It was new. It was exciting. It was something I wanted to explore. So since I couldn't actually find people that look like me or the subjects that I really wanted, so I started writing it myself. And then when I started writing it, I found Small Press, because Small Press was where all the good stuff was hanging out at. So it was like, okay, that's when you ran into your Kate Douglases or your Camille Anthony's, who actually had the, you know, oh, she writing crack thick and getting away with it. That was Camille. That was her straight up and down. So that was another introduction to tell me, you know what, just because you were raised a certain way to believe certain things doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Expand your horizons a little bit, see what other cultures and what other people have to feel about this. So I have a lot to thank the Valley of the Horses for, which in turn made me go back to read The Clan of the Caveman, which was like, oh my God. And then the rest of the series. So yeah, that one mom trying to throw me something that she bought for 10 cents at a thrift store because it was thick, opened up a whole new world. And she regretted it because I started making her stuff. Like, Mom, read this. Oh my goodness. Stephanie, how old are you to be writing this stuff? What happens next? So I sorely put the blame on this on her. It's all her fault.
Yeah, there were definitely, my parents had a rule that I could, you know, if we went to the mall and I went to a bookstore, I could ask for a couple of books, and that wish was going to be granted. I, you know, wasn't going to get a record album. I wasn't going to get other stuff, but if I asked for books, I could be pretty sure I could get one or two. They never looked inside those books. There was no concept of age appropriate. I learned so much, not all of it accurate, but I learned a lot.
But it was so much fun. It was so much fun in the learning.
Yes. And my husband later confessed that when he joined a book club, he picked the selections that had the asterisk next to them that said mature content. He didn't care what the book was. He got all the ones with the mature content, as a teenage boy would. So we all had ways to work the system.
When when I was like 8 or 9, my grandmother said, "Oh, this book has a dragon on the cover. It was Red Dragon."
Yeah.
Lights on, sleeping with the lights on. Can't stop reading, though.
So when you started writing and you got this love for paranormal and romance, how have you brought that together? What kinds of things do you write about, and what are the things, what kinds of stories do you write now that bring those things you love together? EJ?
Well, the first series that I started to write, I wrote a couple of the supernatural suspense books at the very beginning of my career. But the first series that I started, which has sort of blossomed into a story world with now 15 books in it, was based on Celtic mythology. Because I had read Evangeline Walton's retake of the Mabinogion when I was working at a bookstore in the mid-70s. And I was fascinated with how different Celtic mythology was from, you know, classical Greek or Roman. I mean, the stories were very, very different, very peculiar. I mean, they didn't have the same kind of story arcs that a lot of the classical stuff did. But the characters and the kinds of magic and the different kinds of, you know, the conflicts among the species I found very interesting. So I started with my first Fae Out of Water series, was a trilogy based on Celtic mythology, and that world has grown, adding, you know, different species over time that aren't necessarily Celtic, but pretty much all of the paranormal that I write has some kind of mythological hook to it, because I'm a very reactive writer. When I get an idea, it's in response to something else that I've heard or seen. So those kinds of stories, the mythological stories, fairy tales, they spark the idea for the next story. So I've sort of branched off now from Celtic. I've got one book that's actually brings in the Greek pantheon, because, you know, they needed to get their asses kicked because they were not good people. But it's so much fun because you can take that as a jumping off point and then make shit up, which is one of the things I like the most about writing paranormal. It's like, as long as I'm consistent with my own world, it can be anything I want it to be.
Absolutely. Rachel?
I think the main thing that Ari and I have been veering towards is urban fantasy, our Asheville Arcana series. Personally, I think my jam is more like gothic horror. I like spooky. I love spooky. And so the inclusion of that type of thing and Ari's love of action, that's how we got Asheville Arcana. It's the merging of our two very different interests in a way that works for us.
Okay. Raven?
So probably the primary paranormals I have are shifter romances, but almost all of it is UF of some kind, UF romance. So sort of falls in that territory of like, I'm not all the way fantasy, but it's pretty fantasy heavy.
I wrote urban fantasy with minimal romance on the Gail Martin side before I started into the Morgan Brice stuff. So I've always loved making up magic systems and spell work and, looking at what kind of gems and plants are magical and what are some of the traditions across all the different types of craft. And so when I started the Morgan Brice stuff, I hadn't fallen for a fandom like I fell for Supernatural since back in the day when I originally fell for Star Trek, the original series. And so I looked at it and said, well, what is really getting me about this? What's lighting a fire in me about this TV show and these characters? Why do I care so much? And I tried to answer that and find the elements that made me love it so much, and then find ways to put them in original stories that still had the paranormal aspect, the ghosts, the magic, the monsters, but in original settings and original stories. And so that's my hope with my books, is if that's the kind of stuff you like, I've got more of the same thing with the same kind of vibes, because that's what I go for when I'm looking for a book by somebody else. Is, does it have those vibes? Okay, I'm in. Liv?
I suppose to an extent I'm like EJ, sort of a reacting to what's going on around me type writer. When my oldest kid was in middle school, we watched all 7 seasons of Buffy, and out of that came my first published book, which was a vampire story that it was sort of a mashup of Buffy and Spider-Man. It worked. I don't know. Fast forward 5, 6, 7 years, and I was sort of breaking up with the Catholic Church, which, that's big. And out of that came Thaddeus DuPont, who's the vampire character I write in the Hours of the Night series that I co-write with Irene Preston. And I get to sort of, through Thaddeus, get to explore my feelings about, as he's adapting to modern life, how am I adapting? I don't know. And then my most recent series, Soulmates, honestly, it's MMM paranormal. There's a vampire, a shifter, and I'm not sure quite what he is. But I had started it a while ago and then picked it back up and really expanded from a novella to a novel, and now 3 novels and a couple of shorts. But it was during the pandemic. It was during that time. And I really wanted to make it as glossy and glitzy and sexy and pretty as I could, because real life was just a brag. So yeah, that's sort of how my paranormal gets filtered through my life, or vice versa.
That makes sense. Stephanie?
Well, that's kind of hard, because I'm a sci-fi baby myself. So, the first novel I wrote was about a pregnant man who crash landed on a planet and gave birth to twins. Oh, sweet revenge. So when I decided to try to loop a little paranormal in there, I didn't even realize I was doing it. It was just for a short story in a collection of a single author anthology of short stories. I just threw that in because it was cute. And it actually grabbed a lot of attention. It was like, wait a minute, people are having fun with this. Let's see if I can push this a little bit more. So then I started delving into different gods and different pantheons and in different cultures, not just the pantheons that we know. I wanted to get into some that we didn't know too much about. So I was heavily into the Chinese and Japanese pantheons. Sometimes it was Indian. And then, you know what? It was like, you know what? Let's just mix them all together. And we were mixing them all together because we have all these Asians over here now. Let's pull some Native Americans in and let's go back to the Southern roots and let's pull that in. It's like a gateway drug. You open it up and you start learning about something. It grabs your attention. It fascinates you. You want more. I mean, I want more than the person who trips through the fairy ring or slides through a mirror. Let's just say, you know, just take the Asian perspective. You were minding your own business, but evil noticed you. And because evil noticed you, you now have a problem. Doesn't matter if you're good or bad. Things like that and the way different cultures approach their paranormal has always been fascinating to me. So then I started grabbing and learning everything I can. And if I learn something, I'll automatically want to share it with a whole bunch of people. So that just led to me writing more and more and more. I think one of the first solid series that I did that definitely was straight out for paranormal for this purpose was the series I bought for my daughter. I made for my daughter, the Mayfly Mystery series. And that's the one where I actually incorporated the Fae into modern society with everyday life, starting around World War II. And it worked up to now. So we had action, we had adventure, we have murder mysteries going on, all involved with a character that's roughly designed with my daughter's attitude in mind, which was great. People loved it. And from that one, we went to The Wild Hunt, which is a lot of Celtic mythology. Who else is going to find Charon, the Scottish devil, and make him like the master of a BDSM club? Why not? It's always in there. It's in there anyway, because he's got that, love of leather and whipping people. Let's just throw that all in there and make fun with it. So anything that actually grabs my attention will eventually find its way into a book. If not immediately, then I'll hold on to that thought. And so something else makes me react, because sometimes, like a bunch of you guys, I can be a reactionary author as well. But sometimes I'll sit back on it and I'll think about it. And I'll actually plot it out mentally before I go ahead and try to put it down to pen to paper, so to speak. So it depends. But if I have that thought of something caught my attention, I'll hold on to the research for that until I feel it's needed. So my paranormal experience at this point is all over the place. You can't pinpoint one thing that I'm really in love with, because I'm just in love with the other world. No matter what culture, no matter what group it comes from, I'm just fascinated. So my escapism, I really want to escape everything when I get into my escapism, and paranormal is like a perfect way to do that.
Oh, I hear you on that. Ari, how about you?
Well, strangely enough, the very first thing that Rachel and I wrote for publication was Bloodbathory Like the Night. And that it's vampires and shifters, but so weird story with that one is that the whole idea for that book came from the fact that when we were writing fanfic, we wrote this one fanfic where the two main characters had left their magical world and we wanted them to bond over something. And so we created this fictional TV show called Bloodbathory. And so it was just for a fanfic. We created this whole world. And then it's like, hey, that would make a book. And in fact, it made 3 books. And the as always, we tend to mix a little science with our paranormal. And the shifters, there's actually scientific reasons behind why vampires are vampires and why shifters are shifters, rather than purely paranormal reasons of why. It's not magic, it's something else, but it's still paranormal. So those books will always be near and dear to my heart because they were the first ones we wrote.
Awesome. So what aspect of paranormal romance haven't you written yet but would like to? Rachel?
I am not sure, because we've covered a gamut. We've got ghost stories, we've got historical paranormal, we've got urban fantasy. We've covered a lot. I think if if we could do a full length ghost story, like book length. We've done a sort of like a short story novella length, but just, you know, this old British Victorian ghost in the attic, classic Gothic horror in the vein of, you know, Wuthering Heights and Dracula and all of those good, you know, Victorian Gothic stories. If we did a full-length book like that, I would just be squeeful.
How about you, Raven?
I have not yet managed to get around to any ghost PNR. I would love to. I have like 3 or 4 different half-baked outlines for them. So at some point it'll happen, but I haven't gotten there yet. I'd like to.
I did a story for a large prolific works giveaway that includes ghost sex, and figuring out how that was going to work was a lot of fun. But I did.
I remember that.
We've done it.
And there was another one that included sex magic, and that was kind of fun. But I'm excited. I'm doing a Gothic romance, true Gothic, spooky, scary, on the moors kind of thing for Falstaff Books next year. And it's one that I've had the outline for a couple of years now, and just didn't get it in the pipeline. And I'm really excited about that because I loved all those really suspenseful, creepy house at the end of the long lane with all the fog and, you know, something's in the attic. And yeah, that I love that. So I'm looking forward to that. How about you, Liv?
I apparently am a copycat because I really do want to write a good haunted house. I've done
room for another good haunted house.
There's always enough for it. I've done ghosts with what's the book that we just published with Irene? Anyway, sorry, I can't remember my own damn book titles, but yeah, I've been reading a lot of haunted house and enjoying it, and I'm like, yeah, I got to throw my hat in that ring.
Okay, Stephanie?
I'm gonna have to go along with everybody else, in harmony with everybody else's comments. I'm gonna have to go ghost, because it is so hard for me to step away from my upbringing. And I know I would like to think that, oh, it will be easy. I knew that there are different ways and different perspectives, but it's still hard to get past that. Ghosts are no good. They're not bad. They're not everything evil. Don't touch this. This is stuff that you shouldn't touch with. That upbringing is kind of hard to get over. So I have like a million outlines that I've started, story snippets that are in work that I started, but I stopped because it doesn't quite feel right, or it's not conveying what I wanted to convey. So I'm still working on it. I'm going to have that really great ghost story. I might even have ghost sex. It might even be evil ghost sex. And I mean, not incubus type. I might even have the heroine turn evil to be with the evil ghost. That sounds more plausible with something I want to do. But either way, I'm going to have to buckle down, shut up, stop whining, and just let my, imagination run free with this. Like, stop listening to what your parents said. You're grown now. So I'll get that into my psyche, and it's like, okay, you no longer have to work out for my, root working aunties to see if they're going to pop around the corner and be like, you're doing wrong. You're doing wrong. So I'm going to get that ghost, and that ghost is going to be perfect. And the ghost is going to be kinky and doing some really weird stuff, just because I want to get over this whole ghost thing. Because I know the first one, it'll pop open the dam, and then there'll be all kinds of ghosty goodies that are flowing through. So yeah, I want that ghost. Gotta get that ghost.
Ari?
Oh, I'm going to say that I don't really want to write ghosts, but so I'll be the odd person out here. And what I really, really, really want to write is I would like to do a shared world, very much like Thieves World, high fantasy kind of thing, because Thieves World is one of my great and first loves, and as far as the fantasy type genre, and I just think that getting a whole bunch of authors together and having shared characters and being able to do that would be just so much fun.
EJ volunteers. Stephanie, yeah, I think
It was tribute.
So what I'm hearing is that we're going to have your shared, we're all going to be in your shared world, and the rest of us are going to make a ghost romance box set.
I think you've got that right. EJ, how about you?
Well, before I start, I just want to ask Ari if she's ever read Terry Winling's Border Town stories. Look those up because they're really fabulous. It's sort of post-apocalyptic. The apocalyptic thing that happened is that fairy comes back and it sort of completely disrupts this Minnesota town. They're wonderful stories. But I'm going to sort of veer back into the ghost territory a little bit. I've got an idea about a post-apocalyptic I want to write, and possibly some more science fiction. But my most recently completed series was a mashup of cozy mystery and paranormal romance. And I kind of want to do the same thing with ghosts. Not necessarily put the ghosts in the love interest, but make it a mashup of supernatural ghost presence and cozy mystery. So I've got an idea for a series about that. And the other reason I want to revisit ghosts, my first book was a ghost story, but it was much darker, and I want to make it funny. So humorous, cozy, paranormal ghost mystery stories.
Sounds like a winner to me.
Yeah.
Now, we have blown through our time, but I want to go around real quick and let everybody say where people can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, let us know about it. Starting with you, Raven.
So if you want to find my work, you can find it at ravendeHart.com, or I'm Raven deHart, basically anywhere there's social media. And the newest PNR is on, you can't get it on Amazon, but you can get it on Steam or on Google Play Store. It's called Freshman Magic Spellbooks and Tangled Sheets.
Ooh, sounds good. I'm GailZMartin.com and MorganBrice.com. All the social media is a variation of either of those names, so spell them right and you'll find me. My most recent PNR was No Surrender in my Badlands series, and that's got all kinds of ghosts and supernatural elements. And the next one coming up soon is Again, which is the second book in my Fox Hollow Shifter series. So lots going on there. Liv?
So you can find me at livrancourt.com or on most social medias, some variation of live at livrancourt, at live.rancourt, something. I'm not terribly creative that way. And my most recent release was Redeemed, which is book 3 in my Soulmate series, which again is MMM Paranormal. And I am pondering what to do next.
Okay. Stephanie.
You can find me at author stephanieburke.online. All my social media links are there, like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram that I hardly ever use, that I've been abusing. All of my social links are there. And the latest story that I had just dropped last Thursday, it actually is a paranormal. It's called Dragon Lord. It's book 2 in the How Not to Date a Dragon, part of the How Not to Date series. And this one is female. I have one asexual female with her partner, and she gets to turn to basically partner with a dragon who thinks humans are disgusting, but like, we're kind of cute little pets to keep around. So he's hoarding females. And he has a whole army of very angry PMSing females that are about to wage war. It's the second book in the third book series, and that's called Dragon Lord.
Nice. Ari?
You can find me and Rachel at RMcKay.com. Our latest release is A Prince Among Men. That's not paranormal, but it did just come out last week. And in fact, 1 week ago today. And our upcoming books, we have some historicals that are being re-released, some historical Westerns that'll be coming out in the next couple of months. And we are currently working on the next in the Astral Arcana series, which is called Hidden Magic.
Okay. Rachel. You're muted.
Whoops, sorry. Can't really add a whole lot. Yeah, Ari and I share a website, arimckay.com. And that has our socials listed on it. Our last paranormal was Stop Dragging My Heart Around. And we are working on a new Asheville Arcana, which features a non-binary puka.
Oh, yay.
EJ, how about you?
My most recently released paranormal romance was the 15th book in my myth matched world called it's called The Skinny on Ginny, and it's actually kind of a new adult story, very very low heat, low angst. And before that, I completed the first 4 books in my Quest Investigation series: 5 Dead Herrings, The Hound of the Burgervilles, Lady Under the Lake, and Death on Denial. My the best place to find me is at my website, ejrussell.com. All my social links are there.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. This has been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to go find all your books and read them. And thanks all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more LGBTQ, more romance, and more paranormal stuff coming up here on ConTinual. So we'll see you online.